Good afternoon. My name is Matt Clune, and I am Senior Director for Safe Workplaces at the SAFE Project. And we're really excited that you're all here today for what we think is going to be an important webinar entitled Recovery and Employment, Barriers, Obstacles, and Success Strategies. Before I launch into the importance of today's event and our illustrious panel, I just want to tell you a little bit more about SAFE Project. SAFE was launched nearly 4 years ago, sadly after the loss of Jonathan Winnefeld to an opioid overdose, anniversary of his death being 4 years just yesterday. And our founders, Admiral Sandy and Mary Winnefeld, turned their grief, as much as they wanted to curl up in a ball and do sometimes, into action, and created a nonprofit called SAFE Project, which is aimed at mitigating the impact of substance use disorder, eradicating overdose deaths, and working together as a community to make that necessary impact. The way we are organized at SAFE is we really focus on 4 separate spaces or markets, if you will. We're particularly involved within the collegiate community and our Safe Campuses program, where we're working with collegiate recovery programs and collegiate recovery leadership and developing such. We have a Safe Communities project, which is engaged with a number of communities around the country, and more on the way as they seek out answers to their public health, particularly behavioral health issues. We're very active in St. Louis right now and a couple of other communities. We have a Safe Veterans program, which partners with Wounded Warrior, the VA, and SAMHSA, a number of initiatives, seeking to offer veterans and their families the kind of support that they need should they be at risk for or engaged in active addiction or having emotional well-being issues. And last but not least is our Safe Workplaces program, of which I am Senior Director. This is the last initiative that SAFE launched. The Safe Workplaces program, in short, is an effort to get corporations really to think more, to think in a more sophisticated way about the nature and extent of addiction in their workplace, and mental health. We're inclusive in that regard, and obviously the two aren't mutually exclusive. And then to help them develop strategies, goals, and objectives, and help effectuate those goals and objectives. And we've developed a number of resources, technical assistance, and training products that are available to them for that. So before I introduce you to our illustrious panel today, I'd like to just tell you why I think, and I think others will share, and I hope you share in the chat box or live later, why this topic is of such interest. I probably should have introduced myself earlier and said that I'm also a guy in long-term recovery. And so, in thinking through this webinar, my personal experience in recovery is as important as my professional experience. I've done a couple of workshops on this effort. I'm kind of sodden in the content, but what is firmly implanted in my brain is my experience in early recovery. First, not wanting to work in my old place of employment, which, believe it or not, was in our old industry, I should say. was in the addictions world. Yes, I'm one of those crazy people. And then really bootstrapping it, you know, to try to get back on my feet, because I literally had nothing. There weren't the kinds of resources out there 26 years ago that are more commonplace today. And so, but we still have a real long way to go. So today, what we'd like to do is we'd like to focus on what are those early barriers and obstacles for individuals in early recovery towards getting back on their feet, getting engaged in the workplace, finding not just hourly jobs, but jobs that are meaningful to them and keep the lights on and a roof over their head. For those employees who have been dislocated, those in recovery who have lost an accounting license or a license to practice medicine, how do we address the issues of those dislocated workers? So we'll be taking a look at that today as well. We'll also be looking at how the law, what does the federal law, particularly the ADA, have to say about all of this, and what protections does that afford individuals like us? Okay, and my presentation just got jammed here, so if you bear with me. What would be a webinar without some hiccup, right? Okay. I'm gonna try this. And please tell me if I have solved our problem. Okay, I seem to have solved it for now. Whew, okay. First, I'd like to introduce a guy who I can call a friend of mine, someone who I've known for at least a decade, and whose our paths seem to have crossed a number of times throughout our life, even though we haven't known each other. Bill Stouffer is executive director of the Pennsylvania Recovery Organization Alliance, or ProA, as it's known to those in the field. ProA is a statewide recovery organization in Pennsylvania. Bill's a guy in long-term recovery for over 3 decades now. Congrats, Bill. Or as he recently told me, he likes to think of himself as a guy who was formerly a young man in recovery. Bill is quite plugged into the recovery community nationally, as you can see from his bio. And he's going to talk to us all about, he's kind of at the nexus between the peer consumer community and employers, and is very knowledgeable about what's happening nationally to help bridge that gap. Next up, I'd like to introduce Caleb Berkemeyer, who works for the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center right here in Rockville, Maryland. Caleb is an individual with a PhD from Kent State University who's taught on this subject for a while. He presently provides technical assistance and training to those who come to the ADA Center vis-a-vis the Equal Opportunity Commission and U.S. Department of Justice. Suffice it to say that he is a subject matter expert in this area and can explain to us more about what the ADA does to offer protections to those of us early in recovery. In recovery period, I should say, sorry. Brittany Riemann, who was recently nominated as Miss Wheelchair Maryland and just this year, is another person in long-term recovery. Brittany not only has the disability of the disease of addiction, but as the name would suggest, is challenged by some other disabilities. She has pivoted from those disabilities and displayed her resilience by not only working with an organization here in Maryland that provides resources and assists those with issues of disability, but is also critically involved in the creation of the Great Escape Recovery Lounge, which is seems to be kind of modeled after a 12-step recovery house. And Brittany, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that later. And last but not least is Dan McCauley, who is coming to us from West Virginia. Dan is Director of Operations for West Virginia Sober Living. In addition to what the name would suggest, Dan is very heavily involved in the management of sober living facilities, the creation and development of peer workforce, and he's especially invited today to share his experiences, not just on that, what I mentioned, but also West Virginia Sober Living is the recipient of some recent ARCO, Appalachian Regional Commission, ARC rather, got my acronyms mixed up, grants that are designed to pave the way for individuals in early recovery into a variety of vocational tracks. So we're obviously going to do a deeper dive with each of these individuals in just a moment. And I'm checking my notes. And I think we're going to launch in, and I would like to introduce to you, oh, again, I'm having problems with my, sorry, folks.
Matt, this is Maggie. Do you want me to just stop sharing your screen?
Yeah, I'm not sure what's happening here with my slides because they are in order.
Let me see if I can.
Yeah, why don't we just do that?
Thank
you. We were there anyway, right? So let me introduce you all to Bill Stouffer, who's going to tell us a little bit about what he's been up to with ProA in Pennsylvania. And Bill, I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Matt. It's really an honor to be here today. And as Matt alluded to, I am a person in long-term recovery. What I like to say is I'm a formerly young person still in recovery. So I've been in recovery since age 21. I've been involved in work around our field since that time. And I have to say that this issue of employment is one that's vitally important to our community. So in every step of my work, primarily in the public care system, access to employment and ways for people to move out of addiction and into recovery, put the past behind them and build a new life is just fundamental to the recovery experience. So so a focus on this issue is just, very, very important. And so just starting out a little bit about talking about what ProA is. We are the statewide recovery community organization of Pennsylvania. We were founded in 1998. Our first executive director is Donna who actually is our, I believe currently her position at SAMHSA is the recovery. She's informing SAMHSA on recovery. These are new position as of, I think, last week. So we're honored to have somebody has the experience of running a statewide recovery community organization informing SAMHSA. And what we do here as a statewide recovery community organization is to strengthen recovery from the community level, to help build recovery community organizations, to inform the public about addiction, access to recovery, and to educate people about that recovery is a probable outcome when people are given the proper supports and services that they need. So principal among those is employment. And I just want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that people can face in respect to when they get into recovery and they access services, what happens. And there are, as Matt alluded to, a lot of challenges. Primarily, one that we run across is experience with the criminal justice system. And it's also important to note that there's disparate experience with the criminal justice system. People from marginalized communities tend to have greater arrest and incarceration rates. We need to be really sensitive to this as we move into solutions and figure out how to address the disparate impact of our criminal justice policies across America. But so people having criminal histories ends up being a barrier to employment, and not just for people in early recovery. I mean, I'll share a story that we've been dealing with just in the last few weeks. I was working with an individual with 23 years in recovery, Latino female in our field, 10 years doing this work. When I say in this field, doing work around substance use, and went to get desperately needed in the community as she's bilingual and bicultural, just the kind of resources that are needed to connect with the community. Unfortunately, has a history of arrest in the 90s that the employer looks at that record and says, we will never hire you. And so, we need to think about this. We're moving in America to the point where we know that recovery is possible, and it happens every day to millions of us, people just like me. But we also now have to get to the point where we look at some of these things and realize that what somebody did 26 years ago as part of their addiction is not who they are today. And so work to get those criminal justice histories out of the way and move people into the workforce are vitally important. We have a number of laws here in Pennsylvania that there's a Clean Slate Act that helps people get some types of records off of their histories, second chances that have opportunities for people to move forward with those things. And we think these things are good starts, but that criminal history stuff is a significant barrier, and it results in people having to adjust what they do. We also run into, for people more frequently in early recovery, issues with identification. Think about the impact of addiction. People don't necessarily carry around all of their paperwork that they need to get identification, and sometimes they get lost. And so this is a real challenge, particularly for people within our public care system. Employment gaps for individuals who've experienced with addiction, those become issues. Those are things that need to be addressed, and we need to coach people on how to discuss those things and focus on their strengths when talking to employers. Lack of resources to shift gears, as we've been talking, that sometimes people may need to shift gears either because of the impact of their use on their prior profession, or simply because the kind of work that they were doing is not good for them. And being a bartender in early recovery is not a great idea. So if you're a bartender, you may want to shift careers, and so making sure that we have resources so people can shift gears. Transportation can be an issue, particularly in our rural communities. The lack of infrastructure, as we're moving into a workforce that is more online than ever before, having the types of resources that are available for people to connect to interviews and even employment, this can be a real challenge that we need to think about as we move forward. And it's without a doubt that our entire national workforce is changing. So these are the times to think about how do we do these things. And also juggling recovery, because in early recovery, juggling the kinds of things that you're doing to get your life back and employment and other life responsibilities can be a real challenge. And so, as Matt had mentioned, we have, thanks to SAMHSA, we have a workforce support project grant. It's a 5-year grant. We're one of the first recipients, and I believe the first recovery community organization in the nation to get one, where we're working with people across these areas to help them move into employment, to identify friendly employers, to address people coming out of our correctional systems so that we can get them into the kinds of services that they need and to access employment. And these are the kinds of things that we're working on. And two other things that I would want to mention. And recently, we've embarked on a project with two other organizations, REWE, which is a Canadian group that does data collection. They've done it for the Department of Defense and the Gates Foundation and others, and a group called Elevist. And what we're able to do is collect real-time data in large amounts of data in nearly real time. And we've been focusing on stigma. And one of the areas that in a recent survey we did of several thousand Americans is unemployability. And the perception was that roughly 67% of our respondents indicated that they didn't think that employers thought our people were hireable. And this is a disconnect. And one of the things that I would want to get across to the audience is nothing could be farther from the truth. The reality is that people in recovery make great employees. We show up, we want to learn, we want to be engaged. We're often wanting to move ahead in our careers. We're actually very, very good employees who are also very loyal, is what some of the research is showing. So one of the things that, and Matt had talked about this as he started off, is how do we change some of the thinking and what we're doing as we move forward. And, it's an observation that I'm sure everybody here on this call is aware of, that we have this workforce problem in America where there are jobs available and it seems like we're struggling to fill them. Looking at people in recovery as assets is one of the things that we really need to do. And when we invest in our people, we have a tremendous payoff. And that's the other part of this message here. Myself, I barely graduated high school. My first job in recovery was Taco Bell. And I have a graduate degree. I teach at a university, and I did that through recovery. And through recovery, it wasn't that I was not an intelligent kid. I was a kid who frankly was on drugs and was not applying himself. And in recovery, I had a chance to redo all that, apply myself, and make the most out of my life. And the thing about my story, the most remarkable thing about my story is that it's unremarkable in the recovery community. You could look at any community across America and you could see these stories of resiliency and people overcoming the barriers that we have and making tremendous successes of their lives. I work with homeless people who have become PhDs over time, people who have never been employed in their life because they were involved in the illicit drug world, who then get into recovery and start businesses. And this is actually our way out. Addiction is, I would argue, our largest public health problem. my sense is that my personal opinion is that it will eclipse COVID, particularly as some of the issues related to COVID and isolation are exacerbating drug and alcohol use. And so, this is an area of focus so that we can turn our greatest public challenge into our greatest public asset, and that's people in recovery. So every time you take a person like me and they are given a chance to make the most of their life and they're given the resources that they need, we have the possibility of not only changing one life, but an entire community as people get into productive living and they take care of themselves and their families, and this is frankly an answer. And I know during the question and answer time, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the things that could be done to improve this and how employers could think about it. But, these are, I hope that I come across as passionate. And I hope if you're out there listening to this, that you begin to think of people in recovery as assets. And if you're an employer, you want to take a look at how to expand opportunities for people like me, because it's not only in our best interest, it's in your best interest, because we'll show up and we'll work. And we're trying to make our lives better. And in doing that, when you invest in us, it's actually an investment in your workforce. So I don't want to take up too much time. I think we're ready for the next speaker, and I'm just excited to hear what they have to say, and eager as we move to the question and answer period, what you, the audience, may think, and how we can all work on this together. So thank you very much, Matt.
Thank you, Bill. And you offered an awful lot there. That was I would love to go into greater detail on it. I'm hoping we get a chance to do that, because you really painted the whole picture of what we're doing, the challenges that we're confronted by, and those that we work with are confronted by in securing employment, and how do we address stigma in the workplace, the whole 9 yards. And I think I'd like to pivot off of your comment about stigma and the work that you're doing there, and turn to Caleb Berkemeyer, who is going to talk to us about the ADA and what protections the ADA offers individuals in recovery. Caleb?
All right, thank you, Matt. Very glad to be here as well, talking about the ADA, how it applies to addiction. So I just want to start by explaining a little bit about who I work for, and then do a pretty brief run through of Title I of the ADA, which covers employment. And this is a more complicated topic, of course, than can be covered in 15 minutes. But hopefully we'll have some time in Q&A to get a little bit more into it. So in 1990, when the ADA was passed, the Americans with Disabilities Act, as part of that law, it set up technical assistance. And the way that they did that was by creating an ADA national network, which is composed of 10 regional centers spread across the country. So probably there are people who are watching this who may be outside of the Mid-Atlantic region. So just know that whatever region you happen to be in, there is an ADA center that is there that provides information about the ADA. And you can contact that center anytime you have a question, if you think that the ADA is relevant in what you're experiencing. So we here at the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center, we cover Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, Delaware, and DC. And we are not an enforcement agency. The ADA is enforced by mainly the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and the Department of Justice. So they handle the enforcement work. We also are not advocates. So we are just an information center that you can contact if you have questions. So I think I'll start by just going over, because I'm not sure, some people might know more about the ADA than others. So I want to make sure we don't leave anyone behind. So I'm going to start with the basics. The ADA has a specific definition of disability, which is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. So to be disabled under the ADA, it's not so much about a list of specific disabilities, but rather, does your condition fit into this definition? Now, something that some people don't know is that addiction can fall within this definition. And more specifically, addiction to drugs and alcohol. So under the ADA, an addiction is considered to be because it's a change in the your neurological physiology. That is where the impairment resides, and that's how someone who has an addiction is able to fit into the category of a disability under the ADA. Now, of course, there are more addictions than just to drugs and alcohol, and other kinds of addictions are not covered by the ADA. So we're just talking about addiction to drugs and alcohol. Now, we're going to be talking specifically about Title I of the ADA, which covers employment. There are other titles of the ADA that have relevance to addiction. And so, for example, I think that the biggest issue that we see outside of employment would be if someone is trying to get medical treatment from a healthcare professional that has a policy about not accepting individuals who, are using certain kinds of substances. And, specifically for individuals who are in medication-assisted treatments, who may be using Suboxone or methadone or something like this, sometimes these individuals are turned away from healthcare. And there too, there are protections. It's a violation to turn a person away for that reason. So just know that this is not just about employment, but we're mainly going to focus on employment here. So the main aspect of Title I of the ADA for employment is the obligation of employers to make reasonable accommodations for individuals who have disabilities. And an accommodation is basically any kind of change in the workplace or in the way that work is done. So there are, a limitless number of types of accommodations that one could have, depending on the kind of disability and the kind of need that arises. Some examples that could be more relevant to someone who has an addiction to drugs or alcohol and is in recovery would be altering a work. The times in which work is done so that you can attend a support group or a therapy session. You could also request as an accommodation under the ADA unpaid leave. If someone has to enter into recovery treatment, for example, and they have to be out of work for a bit of time, you can request leave under the ADA. You can also request reassignment under the ADA. If there's any reason why an addiction might be causing an issue with the current job that a person has, and if the employer has another job that would be able to be done and wouldn't cause any issues, then you can also request a reassignment. So those are just some examples of accommodations that could be requested. Now, the way this is supposed to work is an interactive process between you and your employer. So generally, the responsibility is on the employee. If they think that they need something in the workplace that's related to their disability, then they should notify their employer of that. And then the employer will oftentimes have an ADA accommodation form that you can fill out. They might not. A form is not required under the ADA, but hopefully the employer has something like this, because it's better if these things are put in writing so that there's no confusion about what's being requested and the kinds of information that's needed. So you'll enter into that process, fill out a form. Now, if your disability is not obvious, then the employer can ask that it be verified by an appropriate healthcare professional. So for addictions, I would say pretty much that's not an obvious disability. So if the accommodation is in reference to something like that, then you'll need to get some kind of documentation stating that that you have an addiction, and then also what that disability related need is for accommodation. Now, people often wonder, does an employer have to give an employee an accommodation if they request it? And as long as the accommodation is reasonable, meaning that it doesn't cause any undue hardship for the employer, which means if it would be significantly difficult either financially or operationally to give the accommodation, which by the way is a very high bar to meet. Most accommodations don't end up being an undue hardship for an employer. But as long as it's reasonable, as long as you are covered by the ADA and the accommodation is related to your disability, then yes, the employer has to give you an accommodation. Now, the next question would be, do you get the accommodation that you want? Well, not necessarily. The employer ultimately just has to provide you an accommodation that would effectively meet your need. So it is possible that you might request something that might be your preference, but there's something else that could work, and the employer could offer that instead. Maybe it's a little less expensive, or maybe it works better for their operations. So it's not that you get whatever you request, but it's that the employer has to provide something that is effective. Now, a lot of people who have a history of addiction may not need any accommodations at work at all. Maybe they've been in recovery in the past. It's been a while, and they are not currently having an issue with use of drugs or alcohol. So there's really no accommodations that are needed. But an area where there's often a lot of discrimination is in disability-related questions that are not supposed to be asked by an employer. And we see this a lot during the hiring process. So during the hiring process, it's broken down into two different sections. You have the pre-offer phase. So when you are applying for the job, when you're doing interviews, and then the second phase would be the post-offer, after they've extended that offer, and then between that time and the time that you actually start your first day of work, that's the post-offer phase. Now, there are different rules depending on which phase that you're in, which we probably won't get into the weeds on that right at this moment. But the important thing to know is that there are restrictions on the kinds of things that an employer can ask, especially in that pre-offer phase. So they're not supposed to ask any disability-related questions. And because addiction to drug and alcohol is a disability, they can't ask questions about that either. So if you ever see a question on an application form, or if you're asked a question in an interview that in some way gets at your addiction, and you think that the question is crossing the line, then you can definitely reach out to your ADA center and just ask them, like, this is a question I was asked in this interview. Is this a disability related question? And if it is, that's technically a violation of the ADA. So I think that's a major area where a lot of individuals face some obstacles when employers don't realize that they're not allowed to be asking these kinds of questions. Now, I wanted to cover too the concept of a qualified individual under Title I of the ADA. So employers are only required to make reasonable accommodations to qualified individuals, which means somebody who can perform all of the essential functions of the job with or without a reasonable accommodation. So someone who has a disability, they might have an issue in performing one or more of the essential functions of their job, but as long as they can get an accommodation to perform it, then they're still qualified. So you have to be qualified in order to receive accommodations under the ADA. Now, while a person who is addicted or who has an addiction is covered under the ADA, if the person is currently using illegal drugs, that is something that will disqualify the individual. So we have to keep that in mind. And this can be an illegal use of prescription drugs as well. So it's not just the use of something that was obtained in an illegal way, but if you have something that was actually prescribed to you and you're using it in a way that it was not intended by the prescription, that too is considered to be illegal drug use. So those are things that would actually disqualify you for protections under the under Title I of the ADA. Now, there's no specific time frame for what current use means. You may be someone who illegally used yesterday, and then you stopped. Maybe it was a week ago, and you stopped. At where exactly that line is between current use and not current use is not specified in Title I of the ADA. And this is not that unusual, because a lot of things in the ADA are individualized. Like if you want to figure out the answer to something like, is this person currently using illegal drugs? You have to do an individualized assessment of that person and the specific factors in their situation, because it'll be different for different kinds of people. So that's just a good thing to keep in mind as well. Exactly what does it mean to be currently using? Now, just to wrap up here, if you think that you're facing discrimination by an employer because you have an addiction, then you can file a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is the agency that writes the regulations for Title I and enforces them. So you can go through that process. You can also contact at the state level. Each state has a Fair Employment Practices Agency that often has a work sharing agreement with the EEOC. And so you could file with either one of them. But that's where you would go if you think that you are facing discrimination. You can find out more information about the things that I'm talking about and about the enforcement process by checking out our website. So if you just search Mid-Atlantic ADA Center, we'll pop right up. So check out our website and you'll be able to get a lot more information about these things.
Caleb, thank you so much. I thought I knew what there was to know of import about the ADA until I heard you talk today. So, and hopefully my experience is shared among those in the audience. You've you most definitely filled in a lot of gaps. I do want to follow up later with an ADA question about what it looks like in practice. I, for example, applied for a federal position and was asked specifically about these issues, which may have to do with security issues and that kind of thing. But I will circle back. In listening to both you and Bill, I'm kind of, you're covering some really on the ground. Bill had used the term juggling a lot of things. What a perfect way to frame what early recovery is like. You're struggling with trying to stay sober, one day at a time. You're trying to, keep a roof over your head. You're trying to re-engage with relationships in your life that may be important to you. And at the same time, you need to work, right? And how to prioritize all of that for someone who hasn't been dealing with those things and has been kind of checking out is quite difficult. So I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Brittany Riemann, who seems to be doing a stand-up job a day at a time in her recovery, and with additional challenges, I might add. And I don't want to speak for her. Brittany, the floor is yours. Please share with us the good, the bad, and the ugly, and whatever you'd like to bring to the table here today.
Thank you, Matt. I want to thank Bill and Caleb for the wonderful presentation that you just had, because this whole topic is my whole world. As I am Miss Wheelchair Maryland of 2021, and my platform is substance abuse in and out of the disability community. And the reason behind that is because my addiction led to my disability. I was in a car accident of March of 2018. I was under the influence of prescription medication and alcohol. I fell asleep behind the wheel. I broke one bone, and it was my T12 that paralyzed me from the waist down. So I'm now a T12 incomplete paraplegic. And you would think, and I was 30 at the time, so I thought I was a functioning alcoholic and addict. I had my kids, I had my house, I had my job, but didn't think that I necessarily was an addict. And you would think because of another traumatic experience would kind of open up your eyes to maybe, we might need to redirect to some different things. That wasn't the case. I still struggled heavily through my addiction, actually for about 364 more days. And then I decided to change my life. So with me gaining this disability, I also gained a lot of experience of being able to go to my doctors, and just because I was in a wheelchair, they would write me a prescription and not give me, even though I knew what the signs and what these little pills could do to me, I manipulated the system. And so it brought my awareness to, the disability community has a lot that goes on too, because every time I spoke up about my experience, I wasn't the only one. Just like in recovery, I wasn't the only one when I would talk about the reasons on behind that I used these substances. So, early on in my first year of my recovery, I did a lot of observing, and I also found out that, this is a disability. Like, just as much as I have a physical disability, I do have something in my brain that chemically says that, I need to use substances to deal with everyday situations. And, I am, as when Matt said, I'm in long-term recovery. Whew, that makes my heart melt, because it makes me feel good that, I've stuck around for so long, and I'm obtaining all of this knowledge and this experience. And so, I I've thrown myself heavily into service and heavily into advocacy work in all aspects of my life. And when it came down to my recovery, with most people on this call that are in long-term recovery, know our recovery has to come first. At least that's for me. So in order for me to get out of the jobs that I was doing, I went to school for massage therapy, but because of my addiction, that, I ruined that career. I was a bartender. That's how I got in my accident. I was cocktail server. I was all of these things. And, I really didn't think that I could have a career. And then, early on in my, I want to say about a year into recovery of my addiction, and 2 years, about almost a year and a half into my, about five, let me rephrase. It was about 5 months into my recovery, about a year and a half into my disability recovery. I was offered a position in an office, and it was a 1-level building, and I checked it out, and I was able to get to the table, and I was able to get to the bathroom, and that was great. But I also was still very, very fresh in my recovery. And, I was at that time making as many meetings as possible. So my meetings kind of deceased, and I wasn't comfortable yet. I mean, they knew I was in recovery because I wasn't lying about that, or I was very open about that. I was very honest about that. But my recovery suffered a little bit. And unfortunately, I got laid off from that job. But then, I kind of redirected, and I started looking, and I happened to come across a Facebook platform through the disability community, because, in recovery, we have our fellowship, and just in the disability community, we have the same thing. And there was a job position, and I was scared because I didn't know what that job position entailed. But it was actually at a Centers for Independent Living, and that's a SIL. And kind of what Caleb was saying, that we have a mid-Atlantic region in this area. And what a SIL is into nonprofit, consumer controlled, typically ran, mostly by people with disabilities, that is operated in the community for individuals with disabilities to provide an array of independent living services, and that includes work services. So I got into the field, and I am now a transition specialist. And what a transition specialist does is I go into nursing facilities and go to people with disabilities. And because, through the ADA, even though it's a wonderful, I'm so thankful for the ADA, it's been here, but, it needs a lot of work. It needs a lot of updating. I want to be able, and so with the ADA, like, a lot of people with disabilities don't know that they can have successful lives out of the out of assisted living places. So I try and help them, and it's more of a peer support position, but I help them, with the resources and trying to find employment, trying to find a way to get out and live on their own independently, transportation, all of those wonderful, great things that we need to, basically live. So, that's really been the fuel. And when I got that position, I was very, very upfront about my recovery, and, telling them that meetings are important to me, and, that my program and my spiritual principles, like, this is something that I need to survive. And luckily, because they're a SIL and because they understood that. So, if I have been in crisis where I've been, I was actually I was out at one of my first facilities, and I get a phone call that my best friend that I met in recovery got in a car accident, and he straight, from our disease, and I had to leave. And I was able to contact my boss and let her know, like, what's going on. And I was able to go to a meeting. And that was, had that not happened, I can't tell you what could have happened. But, it's so prevalent and so important that, regardless if I have a physical disability, intellectual disability, that I still can get what I need to make sure that I can provide the right work for the right, tools in my work area, in my career. So, I'm a really big advocate within that field, and I would love to see ourselves add, a little bit more of that to the programs, because, as we all know, recovery, addiction, substance abuse, it is a stigmatized thing. And being a woman with a disability, a physical disability, and also a woman with a addiction and a substance abuse, issue, that these things are important to me, and that I know that I'm not the only one that needs these services, that needs these, these outlets of being able to speak up when they're hurting at their job and not feel ashamed, or not feel like they will lose their job, or, any of those aspects. And, within all of that, me and a bunch of recovering alcoholics and addicts were able to start a nonprofit and open up a facility in Charles County. It's like a clubhouse. It's called the Great Escape Recovery Lounge, and it can host any 12-step programs, any fellowship or sober events. And, who knows, if we can get that up and running, we might be able to employ, people in recovery to run that business for us. So, these are things that a lot of people in the community are doing, but we don't hear about. And I think it's an important topic of discussion. And, it kind of feels weird, because I know the spiritual principles of recovery, and what the crown and sash, and, not trying to be an emblem of recovery, or, the 12-step program, but just sharing my experience of what I've gone through, and what, I've seen and what I've experienced, and hopefully helping somebody that doesn't necessarily have those same resources, or doesn't have the knowledge of, what the struggles are to have this kind of disability. When you look up I was looking up the definition for accessible, and there was a couple of them, but, one was able to be reached or entered, and that was like, to be accessible by bus or something, of an object, service, or facility able to easily obtain or used. And, when I think of accessible, and I have a shirt on today that says the future is accessible, because it should be accessible to recovering alcoholics and addicts, to people with disabilities, to people that are struggling with mental health, all of these things that not a lot of light gets shined on, these things that, we that have experienced these things can speak up and talk about and share our experience, and help improve the ADA, and help improve our communities, and help, people that don't have this substance abuse issue to understand what it's like to do, and that we can. If you told me 5 years ago, I'm coming up on almost 3 years in recovery and 4 years in my chair. But if you would have told me that I'd be sitting in a wheelchair with a crown and sash, living my best life, being a healthy, happy, striving young woman, mother of 3, advocate in my community, and a grateful recovering alcoholic and addict, I wouldn't have believed you. And it's still kind of unreal. But at the end of the day, we have the capability of doing these things. And, I use this crown and sash to shed light on those things, and to, help see from another person's perspective. Before I end, one thing that I like to say is my higher power has brought me to my higher purpose. And then also another thing that I like to say is that, to be understood, you have to understand. And so to have the open mind of being able to hear from people in recovery, long-term, thriving newcomers, admitting to this raw, very traumatizing situation, and be an understanding of that situation, I think, the world could be a better place. So that's all that I have. Thank you.
Brittany, thanks so much. You are just living testament to the miracles that happen in recovery. And I'm a little speechless at the moment. Keep on doing what you're doing. You said a couple of things that again, I think as we go through every speaker, you all are saying some things that make me want to circle back and go into more detail, and hopefully we'll have time to do that at the end. And I would encourage, by the way, I've been writing in the chat box. We have some shy people in the room today. I don't know. My first recovery webinar where everyone was so shy. But anyway, I'm just kidding you. But feel free to say hello, shoot us a question. We're going to be returning to those when our speakers have finished presenting. So last but not least is Dan McCauley, who's become a new friend. Dan, I think, represents the best in what an RCO can do in terms of providing peer workforce development, sober living, and has gotten innovative in terms of social enterprise as another avenue of support for those who've come through his program and are eager and willing to earn a living through their social enterprise model. But I don't want to steal his thunder. And so Dan, welcome.
Thank you, Matt. And thank you, everybody, for being here. I really do appreciate the opportunity. My name is Dan McCauley. I'm the Director of Operations for West Virginia Sober Living, and I'm on the Board of Directors for a program called Reintegrate Appalachia. We'll explain a little bit what the hammer and the screwdriver are behind me, but I do want to give a little shout out to Willie Neat and Casey Getton, who are both on here. Without these guys, that project would not be up and running every day, and it would not have the support that it needs. And Casey especially has been there since day one, since we were trying to figure out what to do to get the ball rolling. So a little history. West Virginia Sober Living was founded in 2013 with recovery residences. Now we've got 6 different homes for men and women with children in the state of West Virginia. We've successfully created a couple of models of different community-based intervention with peer recovery support out there, operating quick response teams, meeting people where they're at, poaching up with community stakeholders to go find people with substance use disorders that want to start something a little bit different. But we realized, we offered this community, and we offered this healthy place to live, and we offered, access to, sort of the accountability and the structure that everybody needs in that early recovery. But that big piece that we left out initially, and left out for about 6 years, was that idea of purpose, I didn't get clean to go to meetings, I got clean to go to purpose. I entered recovery so that I could find a new way to live. 2019, we received a grant from the Appalachian Regional Commission. And if you're not familiar with the ARC, absolutely amazing. They work all within Appalachia, which is 13 different states, 420 different counties, supplying social solutions and a little bit of funding. So we partnered up with a group called Coalfield Development to take a look at what can we do to increase this idea of purpose in people's lives early in recovery. We had so many community partners, different organizations over the years saying, what can I do to support? What can I do to support? And we finally gave them a chance to put their money where their mouth is. So guys like Casey, me, we went out and said, hey, how about hiring some of our folks? How about giving them the opportunity, even though they may have huge gaps in employment or criminal backgrounds or need special accommodations like times for meetings or times to meet with their therapist or making sure they're making it to their med management? What can you do for these guys, and where can we put them? What we did on our end was supply peer recovery support specialists to make sure that we were doing drug screening. They had weekly check-in meetings where they could come and talk with each other about what it's like to enter the workforce. We were bringing in possible mentors and some guidance from bankers, lawyers, anybody that would come and talk about, hey, you need to clean up your bank account, here's how you do it. You need to clean up your legal history, here's how you do it. And they created their own amazing little society inside of our recovery culture in Appalachia. It was just really cool to see. That program lasted for about a year. I was sort of like, well, what do we do with this information now? And where we had asked so many of these other employers to kind of put their money where their mouth is, at that point, we decided to do the same thing. So we took the idea of Reintegrate Appalachia and took it to the next level. We started a contracting company. Started with a couple guys and a little hope and a couple small odd jobs. A little bathroom built out here, cut a door out of this, built a small porch. And it's grown into something absolutely wonderful. It is really cool to see every morning. I get to the office super early and I watch these guys putting on their boots, pulling their lunch pails together, getting ready to go with a smile on their face. If I can, I think I can share a little picture here. Yeah. Let me tell you about Will, this guy in the middle. My heart and soul lives at that community-based intervention level. I was out hanging out at the shelter in the drop-in center for people experiencing homelessness a couple years ago, and this little wily guy comes in, sweating buckets, bouncing off the wall. And I'm like, "Hey man, do you want to talk?" He's like, "Nope, gotta go shoot dope." And like right back out the back door again. And I thought for sure, this, I was not going to see much more of this kid named Will. Fast forward a couple of years, he's in our recovery home, and I get a little choked up about it, just seeing these guys' life come back together. And here's a picture of Will on his 32nd birthday with the tool bag that all the guys that he works with got him that day. I saw him this morning and I said, "Hey, Will, is it all right if I go ahead and share a little bit of your story?" He said, "Absolutely, man. Please do. I'm proud of everything that we're doing here." And, it's just absolutely amazing to see stories like that. Not everything turns out like that. Our first bit with Reintegrate Appalachia, we were putting people inside organizations. We had one fellow on parole, lifetime of criminal activity in his background, just to support his habit and what he needed to do. Put him in a job. Everybody loved him. This organization had been working with us for a long time, just kind of housing some volunteers for people that needed volunteer hours or whatever it might be. Wanted to do something with the recovery community. He ended up going out and using, got picked up by his PO and promptly got put in jail. For a lot of employers, that would be a situation in which termination would happen. I mean, he didn't show up to work the next day, didn't call, nobody knew where he was for a few days. And also, he was getting high again. Instead of doing that, they came to us and they said, "What can we do?" I remember Casey sitting at the dining room table with the manager of the guy there, going through "Hey, let's make a plan. Let's make it strong. Let's hold him accountable for his actions. But, this does not have to be the end of a career. Just because he's had a recurrence of a disease process does not mean that his life has to be over and this purpose that we've given him has to be stripped away." I saw him the other day. Was that a year and a half later? Gave him a big hug as he was walking back into the same job to go do the job that he does every day. It was a blip on the radar, and it was a serious one. It could have cost him his life. It could have cost definitely put in jeopardy some of the safety of the people that he was working with. But he had the structure and the accountability there to do something different. So what we've done inside Reintegrate Appalachia is not just a construction company. We've got this organization run by people in recovery for people in recovery. Looking at the recovery community in large and not just the people inside our sober living facilities for employment opportunities. And we've set it up for them. So they've got regular meetings with peer recovery support. We have partnered with Ascension Recovery Services that employs or gives the opportunity for interns through West Virginia University's vocational rehabilitation programs to bring their master's level clinicians doing their internships in to meet with these guys on a regular basis to start to put together plans for ongoing psycho ed and the support that they need to take those next steps towards their vocations. The cool part about being a nonprofit is that we got to spend all the money we make, so we can keep that overhead pretty low. These guys want to go and get certifications. They want to become electricians. They want to become plumbers. We'll pay for it. These guys show up, suit up and show up. They're gonna have tools in their hand to do the job. They're gonna have the education that they need. They're gonna have the support, the leniency to be able to make sure that they're making their meetings, to make sure that they're attending all their med management appointments. And it's amazing, when offering just that little bit of support, just really good, honest to gosh, human support for the things that they need every day, how awesome and grateful they are. Seeing the smile on their faces, I've seen a bunch of construction workers that don't look the way these guys look. They're suited up, ready to go, coffee in hand, waiting for the van. You know, they're ready to go to work and they're ready to be grateful about it. And you know, I couldn't be more happy with what that looks like every day. But I do just kind of want to show you one more picture. Here's the guys. This is the team right now. And what they're starting in on is the renovation and demolition of a building that's going to turn into a 3.1 level of care. So these guys in recovery today, we're out there breaking down walls, putting their blood, sweat, and tears in a place that's going to serve 36 men for 6-month stays. And I think that's amazing. And they couldn't be happier to do it. Every single one of those smiles on there is a changed life, you know? And it's not just their life. It's that ripple effect that we have in recovery. Every single one of those person has friends or family or someone else that's been affected by their disease, and they can be affected the other way by their recovery today. That ripple effect can show that strength and that hope. We do recover, we do get better, and we can build something new and something awesome. So, you know, I couldn't be more proud to be part of this organization. Couldn't be more proud to see these guys on a daily basis. And I just think, you know, it goes to show, just, you know, give us a chance. We're going to change things for the better. So that's what I got, Matt. Thank you so much.
Dan, thank you so much. And you put a smile on my face, seeing the crew, bringing me back to my old days. I put a question in the chat box, and Tracy, is it possible to open the lines up, or how do we want to control that? Because I do want to ask a question of the audience.
Yeah, so, well, first we had one question come in a little bit earlier for the panelists about the ban the box legislation.
Yes. Let's get to that first. Randy asked that.
So it's, do you think the ban the box legislation that many states have already adopted, and that'll go in effect in December for federal employers and contractors, goes far enough?
Does anyone want to tackle that? Randy, would you? Sorry.
Yeah, I would just say, my opinion is it doesn't go far enough, and you know, that opens up the door at the interview process. But there are still, you know, many positions that require criminal background checks and exclusionary that have exclusionary criteria. The example I gave in my presentation about somebody in a medical setting who was barred from employment, you know, 26 years after an arrest, that in an entirely different life. You know, we need to get rid of these histories that have no bearing on the individual's life, in more than that go farther than ban the box. I mean, it's a good start. It gives people an opportunity to get in the door, but we have to go farther.
Thanks a lot, Bill. Any others have feelings about ban the box? How do we give folks a second chance? Without, if they have criminal histories, without their criminal histories, if nonviolent, interfering with their ability to make a living. I have to tell you, this this is really like the first recovery-oriented webinar that I've done, and I've done a few, where folks are so quiet. That's okay. We're happy you showed up. At the risk of being a Debbie Downer or provocateur, I guess, you know, and Caleb, please don't take this personally, but I think about this when I think about all federal legislation, like the ban the box legislation, right? So we have this protective legislation out there. But, you know, when you're working in the field and in the trenches, and you're new in recovery, the thought of asking that employer about, hey, is it okay if I check out at lunch? or instead of my half an hour, I really need an hour and 15 minutes, but I'll put the time in afterwards, is daunting. Because some employers, stigma is alive and well. And I guess I'm wondering from our audience whether, or panelists, how folks have dealt with that, how they've helped peers that they're working with deal with it. Anything to color the narrative here today would be much appreciated.
Hi, my name is Willie. I'm a
Hey, Willie.
program director at Reintegrate. We run into this just about on a daily basis. Dan kind of gave a really nice overview of what our enterprise is. But guys coming in and out of jails, hospitals, institutions, all of these places, they don't have really sometimes any of the things that were mentioned early on. Identification cards, driver's licenses, social security cards. They don't have any of this stuff. Sometimes they don't even have family to get them a leg up to help them. And so, what we're finding is, even though we have a lot of resources at our fingertips, we just need to know where those resources are and get them in place all at the right time. And finding workarounds is what we're doing just about every single day. In place of a social security card, we're having to use proof that has been filed for, or we have to get letters saying that so and so is their ID will be arriving at this time. And so these gaps, they're really tricky, because those gaps are big enough for guys to fall through. The time that you get out of one of these places, get into a safe place, hopefully, to live. I'd say that's even before ID, but that's hard without an ID. I think the destigmatization and kind of bringing together as many resources as possible is really key, because federal mandate, those types of things, those boxes that we want to get rid of, those can take years and years of legislation. And I think it's kind of the onus falls upon us to kind of gather these resources together and make them available as best we can. I mean, just like this webinar here. I don't know so much about legislation. I don't know how it works as far as making changes at that level. But I know within our company, we're constantly finding workarounds and trying to streamline this, because that's where it happens. Somebody comes in for help, they're willing to change, but they're on that line. And the more time it takes to get a paycheck in hand, or just get something stable in their lives, that's where they can fall back out. They're back out on the street, back out doing what they were doing because they have to survive. And so I don't have a grand answer, but what we are finding over at Reintegrate are a lot of workarounds. I mean, it's I don't know if you're familiar with was it the Rube Goldberg machines? The things where the bowling ball goes down the track and hits something else, and it's all just to fry an egg. Those are the kinds of things that we're having to do, but we're able to start taking those mechanisms out once we go through them a few times. But I think that's a little rambly, as I often tend to get. But that's
no, Willie. Thank you so much, and you said a whole lot there, actually. If you would, indulge me and allow me to try to connect some dots between, we're nearing the end of this. So what I heard you talk about, Willie, was, your primary theme was workarounds, right? And so what we all know is that, folks in what's the, one of the primary personality traits of folks who make it in recovery is resilience. And before all these programs grew up and had structure, there was the meeting before the meeting and the meeting after the meeting, where you kind of learned how to, how to get that ID back, and how to, get this or that to get on your feet, or learn about that new job. So, so I'm going to read something in the chat box, and then I'm going to ask you all a question. So Aaron Gardner writes, in West Virginia, prisoners can get West Virginia birth certificates at no cost before they are released, in addition to prison ID that can be exchanged at the DMV. Important, having an ID. Obviously need to be in contact before release to ensure that happens. Well, no one, back to my earlier point, no one really knows that unless people are sharing that with one another, and I bet you it's not really broadcast really well. So it travels through the food chain from one person to another in recovery, or peers who are involved, or counselors. And that's how folks get to know. So the transition point that I want to pivot to right now is recovery ready workplaces. So we know we started this webinar out with kind of a full discussion of what many of the barriers and obstacles are for individuals in early recovery and even later in recovery towards secure and gainful employment. Stigma is still alive. And yet the Biden administration, I applaud their effort, don't hear me wrong, wants to move our country towards recovery ready workplaces. And I think what that means is workplaces that are more receptive to hiring individuals in recovery, individuals who place, corporations that place greater trust, as Bill alluded to earlier, or I'm sorry, it might have been Dan, in contacting the organization when someone does, when there is a recurrence of the illness. So trust is developed between provider and community leaders and employers. What does recovery ready workplaces look like to you? What if you had an opportunity to sit in the Oval Office and talk with Biden and his team? What would it look like? And you can feel free to drop your ideas in the chat box. You can feel free to unmute yourself. We're an intimate group.
Hi, my name is Renee with Amethyst Place, and we have like
Hey, Renee.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
My name is Renee with Amethyst Place. We are located in Kansas City, Missouri. We provide housing for women in recovery and their children. So they have like apartment style living. We have adopted like 100 jobs for 100 moms program, where we go out and meet with certain employers to kind of talk about our program and see if they'll work with us in regards to, like, we have a lot of single moms, so not scheduling them through at a certain time period of like they can only work 8 to 5 or no weekends. And we kind of do case management with those jobs. So the mom like signs a release in order for them to get information, like if they're having a problem with attendance issues and things. What we're running into now with getting more of these employers on board is if our moms have felonies. A lot of them do background checks and they're not able to hire them on. So we have been running into some employees, like moms doing peer support specialist type work,
Mhm.
and being with like a hospital in a hospital setting, and they are not able to work in that hospital setting just based off of their guidelines for not hiring people with felons. So with all that being said, I would like you said earlier, people make mistakes. That doesn't mean like they're the same people that they are. Like an opportunity to give them another chance to be in those settings.
Absolutely. Thanks, Renee. I guess you're talking about peer intervention in hospital EDs, right? Which has proven to be a highly successful way to tap into the vulnerability of individuals after they've overdosed or experienced some other catastrophe, and get them into treatment. And so some of our peers can't work there because of prior criminal history. Do any of the panelists or other people in the room have any solutions for Renee in this area? How do we work on this?
I just keep it real simple. You know, we our workforce in America is changing, and you know, I'm an employer, and when I run across somebody who's got childcare needs where they're going back to school, I actually try to accommodate them because I know that loyalty goes both ways. And if I can accommodate a worker's life, and they're going to stay with me. I may not be able to afford to give them more money, but if I work with them, they're going to stick with me. They're going to grow. We're going to grow, and we're going to grow together. And that's something that other employees see too, and it retains my workforce. And I think that's all we want. You know, we want employers that are going to accommodate that. Sometimes people in early recovery may have some needs. Some accommodation is going to pay off for you in the long run. I mean, that's the simple message about that. And there's plenty of us in recovery. There's millions of Americans in recovery. You know, we help get people jobs through like an underground railroad of recovering people, helping recovering people. Been doing it for years. You know, but we need to broaden it from there.
Thanks, Bill. I understand that Maureen has her hand up. Can we unmute Maureen with the question?
Hi. I didn't
Hi there,
realize.
Maureen.
Hi, I did have my hand up a while back, but I didn't realize I had my hand up. So
Did the passion leave? Or
yeah, no. Well, I was thinking when I had my hand up, I was thinking about what Mr. Stoffer said, and you were talking about the employment, because I find myself in that situation with the felony being so long ago and so ridiculous, and it just keeps coming up and coming up and coming up. I put down for a pardon last year, and I help other people through a pardon writing process, but I hired an attorney for mine, and just the process is just so long. And there's no information back and forth, you know, like my felonies for breaking a window in my own house. And when I see everything that happened at the Capitol and these people breaking windows and destroying public property and getting misdemeanors, it's like the incongruity in the laws is just ridiculous. But then I did send a question to Ms. Stefek about the how do we get a recording of this so we could share it with other groups, because I work with other groups ending mass incarceration and the Lehigh Valley Justice Institute. And how do we get the contact information for the speakers? So I don't know.
Thank you, Maureen.
Sorry about that confusion.
So before I'm going to turn this over to Tracy to answer your question in a second. We have to wrap up. So one of the things we would want to say to President Biden about his recovery ready workplace issue is we need to address criminal expungement, criminal history expungement, take a finer look at types of, not one felony is not the same as another. And as Bill said, here we are living in an economy where they can't find workers for some jobs. So in my opinion, greater flexibility. Tracy, over to you.
Yeah, so it is 3:30. We are wrapping up, and I see Brittany actually dropped her contact information in the chat. The other panelists you're welcome to as well. You can also email us directly at contact@safeproject.us. I can also drop in my personal work email at Safe Project as well if you want to reach out at any time. And it also, this has been recorded, so we'll be sharing the recording next week across our website and our social media channels as well, if you follow us at Safe Project US across the traditional social media channels. So thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. And I'm mindful of the hour. I want to thank everyone who showed up today for this important webinar. I consider this part of a dialogue, right? We didn't capture everything we wanted to today, but we began a very critical dialogue thanks to our panelists, who I'd like to especially thank, who provided us with real fundamental building blocks to kind of frame this dialogue and to help advance the advancement of securing employment for individuals in early recovery. So thank you again for all showing up, and have a terrific rest of the day. We'll be seeing you soon.
Thank you, guys. Happy Recovery Month.
Happy Recovery Month.